Washington State is making cuts to public lands, closing campgrounds, reducing trail access, scaling back maintenance. At the same time, the state just vetoed funding to fight retail theft in one of the worst retail crime environments in the country. Less access, less enforcement, more strain on communities, different issues, same question. What exactly is the state prioritizing right now?
From Seattle to Los Angeles, this is Left Coast News. No apologies, just the truth.
Welcome back to Left Coast News, the show where we break down what's happening across Washington and the West Coast, and what it actually means for your daily life, your wallet, and your community. Today, we're looking at two separate decisions coming out of Washington State that point to a much bigger picture. On one side, public lands, recreation, and access getting scaled back. On the other, retail theft, enforcement losing support after a veto at the top. Two very different issues, same underlying reality. Let's get into it. Today, we're looking at two stories that seem unrelated on the surface. One is about Washington's public lands, campgrounds, trails, and recreation sites facing closures and service reductions after the governor signed the supplemental operating budget. The other is about Governor Bob Ferguson vetoing funding that lawmakers had approved to keep an organized retail crime pilot program going. But once you get past the separate headlines, the pattern is hard to miss. In both cases, the state is telling people the same thing in two different ways. There isn't enough room in the budget to preserve the level of access, maintenance, coordination, and enforcement that people assumed they were already paying for. Let's start with the public land side of this because this one hits a lot of Washington families directly, and it hits them fast. The Department of Natural Resources said in February that it had identified recreation sites across the state that could close or see service reductions because budget cuts are worsening an already long-running shortage of maintenance money and staff. DNR said its recreation program is responsible for clearing trails, cleaning restrooms, handling storm damage, and keeping recreation areas safe and usable across millions of acres, but that this work has been underfunded for years. And this is not some vague future concern. DNR's own public list included potential full campground closures and service reductions at places like Bear Creek, Chapaka Lake, Snoqualmie area trails, and Ryder Foothills State Forest. Reporting from OPB said DNR was prioritizing around 19 sites either for closure or reduced services. And agency officials explained that campgrounds are especially vulnerable because they're expensive to operate. Translation: if staffing and maintenance money get thin enough, they lock the gate, reduce trash pickup, cut bathroom cleaning, and hope the public just learns to expect less. That matters because these aren't boutique amenities for wealthy hikers with carbon fiber trekking poles and too much free time. These are public access points to land that belongs to the people of this state. When campgrounds close, trails degrade, and restrooms stop getting serviced, it doesn't just inconvenience weekend recreation. It changes who can realistically use the land. Families with kids, older people, folks who are not hardcore backcountry types, and working people trying to take cheap local trips that get squeezed out first. It's one thing to say a trail is open. It's another thing when the site is filthy, damaged, undermaintained, or functionally inaccessible. That is a real loss of access, even if the state avoids using those words. That's an inference from the agency's own descriptions of likely impacts, including less maintenance, more degradation, and potential locked gates. Then you get to the money side, and this is where the public has every right to be irritated. Washington State Parks announced last year that the Discover Pass was going from $30 to $45 starting October 1st, 2025. The agency also said the operation and maintenance of state parks relies heavily on earned revenue like the Discover Pass, camping, and other fees. But in the same breath, state parks said it still would not see significant new revenue in the 2025 to 27 biennium because of the state's budget shortfall, reduced general fund support, and added costs. State Parks said about 71% of its funding in the 2025 to 27 biennium would come from earned revenue, up from about 65% in the current biennium. In other words, the public is being asked to pay more directly while the state still cuts and squeezes the system. That is not a great sales pitch. And the staffing numbers make the whole thing look even more brutal. OPB reported the DNR maintains over 5 million acres and has just 60 field staff, with each responsible for more than 300,000 acres. OPV also reported that last year's cuts zeroed out DNR's appropriation for Washington Conservation Corps crew, which had represented about 50% of the agency's statewide field work capacity. So when officials say closures and maintenance pullbacks are being driven by capacity, that isn't PR fluff. That's what it looks like when you hollow out the workforce and then pretend the acreage will somehow maintain itself by the power of positive thinking. Now put that next to the retail theft story. In the supplemental budget, lawmakers approved $500,000 in general fund state money for fiscal year 2027 for the Organized Retail Crime Pilot Program, also called WAORCA, WAORCA. The Washington Retail Association described that funding as continuing the pilot launched the year before, focused on developing responses to organized retail crime, particularly through diversion-oriented programs. But Governor Ferguson vetoed that section when he signed the budget. The veto message in the enacted budget is explicit. Section 127.29, Retail Crime Prevention, was vetoed, and the governor wrote that while preventing incidents of retail crime is important, the state's fiscal situation necessitated tough choices. That is not speculation, it is right there in the veto language itself. And that matters because this was not a symbolic pilot with no evidence behind it. Representative Mary Levitt's statement after the veto said the earlier $1 million pilot had already produced visible results. She pointed to King County, where prosecutors filed 142 retail theft cases from January through June of 2025, about 2.5 times the average across the prior 4 years, and said local officials tied that increase to the added funding. Her statement also said the pilot generated 402 program-driven law enforcement responses in its first 5 months, identified 1,194 people eligible for diversion, offered diversion to 343 individuals, initiated 154 diversions, and generated 5,868 organized retail crime reports. Obviously, that is an argument from a supporter of the program, so take it as advocacy with data attached, not divine revelation. But it does show this was not money for a slogan, it was being used. So on one side of this combined story, Washington is saying it cannot adequately maintain recreational access across state land. On the other side, Washington is saying it cannot continue a theft response program that lawmakers had already funded and that supporters say was producing measurable enforcement and diversion results. Same state, same budget pressure, same answer to the public. We can't afford to keep doing this at the level you expect. The bigger context here is the budget hole itself. Washington's Office of Fiscal Management says the state is facing a budget shortfall driven by roughly $12.6 billion in higher costs to maintain current services and program levels over the next 4 years, tied to inflation, higher caseloads and safety net programs, expansion of popular programs, workforce costs, and weaker than forecast revenues from things like home sales and some tax collections. OFM also says agencies were directed to identify reductions, with many cabinet agencies told to target at least 6% reductions. So yes, this is a real fiscal crunch. This isn't just one governor waking up and deciding he hates campgrounds and stores, but the existence of budget crisis does not settle the argument. It just moves the argument to priorities. Because budgets are moral documents in a very practical sense. They show what government will protect first when there isn't enough money to protect everything. And what these two stories show is that Washington has chosen to tolerate more strain in two areas that ordinary people notice immediately: access to the outdoors, and confidence that stores can operate without getting picked apart by theft. Public land is part of the state's identity. Retail order is part of daily normal life. Once both start eroding at the same time, people stop hearing temporary adjustment and start hearing managed decline. That last phrase is an inference, but a fair one from the pattern of service reductions, fee increases, and vetoed continuation funding. There is also a broader economic angle here that matters. On the recreation side, closures and degraded maintenance do not reduce convenience. They hit gateway communities, campgrounds, local tourism, and all the little rural communities built around access to state land. On the retail side, theft losses do not sit politely inside a spreadsheet and spare the public. They show up in store closures, locked merchandise, security costs, product scarcity, and higher prices. The Levitt statement put the impact near $3 billion on Washington's economy and businesses, while supporters of the program argued that losing the funding would put small businesses and neighborhood retail safety at greater risk. That is, again, an advocate's framing, but it points to the real world consequence. The state is saving money on paper, while some of the downstream costs just get pushed outward onto communities and businesses. From a constitutional and small government perspective, this should bother people for a simple reason. A state government can justify all kinds of spending, all kinds of programs, all kinds of interventions. Fine. Humans in Olympia love that sort of thing. But if government is going to tax, regulate, charge access fees, and expand its footprint into daily life, then the bare minimum expectation is that it keeps public land usable and helps maintain basic public order so lawful commerce can function. When people are paying more for access and still getting closures, and lawmakers approve theft response money only for it to be vetoed, the public starts asking a very reasonable question. What exactly are we funding first? That question is not answered by saying tough choices, it is sharpened by it. So the deep takeaway from these two stories is not just that Washington has a budget problem. Lots of states have budget problems. The deeper point is that in Washington's current hierarchy of priorities, two of the most visible forms of government performance are being weakened at the same time. One is the ability of normal families to use public lands that they help fund. The other is the ability of businesses and local jurisdictions to keep pace with organized retail theft using an active pilot program the legislature had already decided to continue. Different parts of the state, different constituencies, same public message, lower expectations. And politically, that is dangerous territory, because people will tolerate a lot when government says money is tight. They are less likely to tolerate paying more, getting less, and being told the system is still basically working. That's when cynicism hardens into distrust, and frankly, looking at these two stories side by side, it's not hard to see why. Two different issues, public lands and retail theft. One affects how you live your life outside, the other affects how you live your life day to day. And in both cases, the messages coming out of Washington right now are the same. There isn't enough room in the budget to maintain the level of access or the level of enforcement that people have come to expect. That doesn't mean the problems go away. It means they get pushed outward onto families trying to use public land, onto small businesses trying to stay open, onto communities trying to hold things together. Budgets force choices, and those choices tell you exactly what matters most. Right now, Washington is showing you those priorities in real time. If you made it this far, you're exactly the kind of person we built this for. This channel exists to cut through the noise and give you real, unfiltered analysis on what's happening across the West Coast. Follow and subscribe on all platforms: YouTube, Rumble, Brighteon, BitChute, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, X, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And most importantly, share this episode. That's how we grow. And drop a comment below and let me know what you think about the loss of a lot of public access areas and how that's going to affect your summer plans. I think this is going to affect a lot of families that can't afford to take a big vacation, but they can afford to go camping with their kids. Now you're going to have increased pressure on whatever is left open. We talked about this before, and now this list of closures has grown. I think it's unfortunate that the state doesn't see the importance of recreation areas for the citizens. And the fact that we're paying more for access to those locations and now having less opportunity to go is wrong. The retail theft thing, that's just insane to me. But this state government does not prioritize public safety, does not prioritize law enforcement. The retail theft program was supported by Democrats and Republicans, and they were making major strides. Washington is one of the highest retail or the highest retail theft crime, highest in the country for retail theft crime stats. So the fact that they're cutting this program, I mean, it just goes along with everything else they do in public safety and criminal justice in this state. And it's disappointing. So drop a comment and let me know what you think. Thanks for watching.